But the Dunning-Kruger effect, people that are new to something, the confidence spike initially. Then, the more they look into it, they realize they don't actually know anything. And then they start to realize, okay, maybe I do know something. But then wait a second, it's actually still very complicated. Because the answer to any question is usually, it depends. And otherwise, you'd be spamming false dichotomy or black and white logical fallacies. Because there's always a lot of variables. Reductive logical fallacies is when you pretend that there are not. The Dunning-Kruger effect reveals how individuals with limited experience tend to overestimate their skills and knowledge due to the unawareness of what they don't know. And so here's what's interesting. I think actually Dunning and Kruger were actually quite limited in their study. Welcome, Saber Crosby. I think they were quite limited, but that doesn't mean they weren't onto something. That doesn't mean they're not generally correct. But I'll explain why I think they were incomplete in their full analysis. Because they were mostly looking at data. They're not necessarily looking at the reasons behind it incredibly deeply and why some people don't suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect at all. And so that's what I go over in my book a lot as well. So I'll just go over the cognitive bias as Wikipedia defines it, and then I'll get a little deeper. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias that describes the systemic tendency of people with low ability in a specific area to give overly positive assessments of this ability. The term may also describe the tendency of high performers to underestimate their skills. A lot of people don't really focus on that part of it. But I'll explain the limitations after I go over all of this. The term may also describe the tendency of high performers to underestimate their skills. It was first described by the psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger in 1999, which is actually fairly modern for the fields of psychology and philosophy. In popular culture, Dunning-Kruger effect is sometimes misunderstood as claiming people with low intelligence are generally overconfident, instead of describing the specific overconfidence of people unskilled at particular areas. And that's true, and that's why this chart here is somewhat of an oversimplification. The Dunning-Kruger effect has been demonstrated across multiple studies in a wide range of tasks from fields such as business, politics, medicine, driving, aviation, spatial memory, examinations in school, and literacy. I mean, it's actually everything. And that's what's so fascinating on how it applies to everything. The original study by Dunning and Kruger focused on logical reasoning, grammar, and social skills. The effect is usually measured by comparing self-assessment with objective performance. For example, participants may take a quiz and estimate their performance afterward, and their estimates are then compared to their actual results. And this has gotten worse and worse for a few different reasons. I'm going to spoil it here just so everybody can follow along here. The two factors they did not specifically go into deeply is narcissism and mental weakness, which both of those all go together as well. And this is something, and again, I did a dedicated podcast on this as well, Are You Mentally Weak? Between that one and the metacognition one. So most people are very mentally weak, and we're not talking about clinical narcissism here. We're talking about narcissistic tendencies, may or may not be a clinical narcissist, but their ego basically has them on really short strings, and that's connected to mental weakness, because you do have to be mentally strong to be able to take criticisms, because most supposedly functional adults walking around these days, I mean, what is their true mental strength level? I mean, most of them are like 4-year-olds. They can't handle any kind of they can't handle being wrong. I mean, just look, even in the post-Epstein era with conspiracies, Like, there's still a lot of coincidence theorist bootlickers, these authority worshipping cultists. They're still pretending most conspiracies are fake. So, Dragon Tracer says, in controversial topics, most people don't get past the know-it-all stage. Yeah. Well, in many topics. Sarah Catherine says, I'm learning about this in my psychology class, too. Yeah, I think, so, I don't know what school, I don't know what grade you're in, or if this is college or high school, but even college level, they really don't go that deep in the Dunning-Kruger effect. And that's why, even when I started this entire podcast, when I started MINDSHOCK, logic and reason are not independent of psychology. So everything, in my opinion, goes back to, in some way or another, and yes, this is a positive claim, one of the very few I have made, is, I shouldn't say absolutely everybody, most people, this is going to be going back to mental weakness. Because the difference between somebody who can understand that governments do bad things and conspire, that evil people don't always act alone, especially not politicians or the cops, they don't always act alone. So this lack of understanding, it's mental weakness. You don't need a crazy high IQ. There's people with relatively high IQs that are so mentally weak they can't grasp conspiratorial concepts because they need their blankie. They need their cult of authority worship because they're too mentally weak to live in a world where so-called political leaders, authorities, would be involved in these things. Satanic ritual abuse, etc. So the mental weakness is far greater of a factor than IQ. Far greater. I mean, there's middle school dropouts who understand that there's people in positions of authority that do bad things and they don't always do them alone. So this mental strength aspect is critical. And then you have ego and narcissism because, especially the past 30, 40 years or so, all of society, I mean, especially post-Instagram release, but all of society is basically designed to appeal to the ego now. And with that, you have far more narcissistic people who are too mentally weak to even consider the possibility that they're not only wrong, that they're wrong about everything. Think about the amount of mental strength required. Now, another factor that people don't really... I mean, this is one of my favorite quotes of all time, and this is connected here too. Upton Sinclair, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding. So this is, again, connected to the ego, because, for example, let's say certain medical treatments actually don't work as advertised and perhaps might do way more harm than good, if any good at all. We don't need to really specify which those are. But if you're in a profession that is making money off of those things, are you even going to try to summon the mental strength required? Like, you wouldn't even try because your paycheck is dependent on you not doing that. And most people, again, you have to be mentally strong to care about the truth more than your paycheck. And there are examples of this. I mean, you know, the whistleblowers. The whistleblowers and a lot of these things that come forward, they're literally putting their lives on the line. That's mental strength. Yeah, there's an old saying, you know, don't believe everything you hear. There's a better one. Don't believe everything you think. When I first heard that one, that's a good one. That's a good one. Again, that goes to mental strength and ego, because think about it. Like, most people are so narcissistic that they connected their identity to their thoughts and beliefs about reality, their political identities, whatever. So they connected their identity to it because they're that insecure and mentally weak. So this is, of course, all connected to the Dunning-Kruger effect. So it's not just about competence, even though that's all a factor as well.